So we're going to talk about the 400 meters today. The Feed the Cats system is sometimes the immediate feedback I get after I talk about Feed the Cats is, what do you do for your 400 guys? So the most important thing I think about what I'm going to be talking about tonight is why we do things. Now, people talk about the why all the time, but there's a lot of reasons why I've come to this way of training kids. And I think without knowing these things, it'd be ridiculous to get to the specifics. You know, the most specific stuff will come at the end of my presentation, not at the beginning. Probably the most important slide that I have of my 77 slides tonight is this tweet from last year from BJ Stevens, who runs at Purdue. This is why we feed the cats. This is, to me, unacceptable that a college athlete would hate track 5 days a week, 6 days a week actually, and get 934 retweets of this. And you can say, oh, that was just a funny tweet. Bullshit. This is not a funny tweet. And there are so many track athletes that are like this. They're beaten down, run down. And I really believe if you don't love what you're doing, you'll never be as good as you should be. So keep this slide in mind. I went through the same type of program. I was a basketball first, football second, track third type of guy, but I did not like track in middle school, high school, or in college. My coach said, we're going to call you the Dragons because I'm going to run you until your ass is dragging. And he did. I wore high top pro models every day in practice because we never timed a short sprint, ever. We ran repeats of 200s, 300s, 400s, 500s, 600s, and combinations of the above. This is an actual slide from a Clyde Hart presentation. Clyde Hart, the greatest coach that ever lived, not arguably, he's the greatest 400 meters coach that ever lived. And I disagree with all four of these premises. Actually, I agree with the first two. I'll let you read those. However, I do not agree that the 400 requires endurance. I don't agree that you'll get protected from injury by running 15 200s. I don't think people that get stronger get faster. So anyway, what I've developed is very much the antithesis of Clyde Hart. This always bothers people. When I say that Clyde Hart nearly ruined high school track and field, you say, well, wait, you just said he's the greatest coach of all times. He was, but he was at Baylor University. And what happened was high school track coaches took his program, plugged it in for 14-year-olds. The big problem, and you guys all know this, that probably a majority of head track coaches are also the cross-country coach. And part of a cross-country coach's brain, sometimes 80% of a cross-country coach's brain, is thinking about cross-country 12 months a year. And so this whole idea that Clyde Hart really did a lot of aerobic work in the fall of the year really fit in to their mindset. I've studied Clyde Hart quite a bit, and he started off with huge volumes, and he did lower it some later in the year during the competitive season, but not much. He was still doing 3 200s the day before a meet. And I think most coaches fall in love with the idea of outworking the competition. This is probably the fundamental difference between me and Clyde, is that he believed that the 400-meter dash is an endurance sprint incorporating the speed of the sprinter and the endurance of the half-miler. I do not believe it's a hybrid at all. I believe the 800 is a hybrid, not the 400. So I invented Feed the Cats in 1999. First, I had to admit that track sucked, and that includes the way I coached track my first 17 years. In 1999, I was 40 years old. I was probably older than most of you when I decided that I had coached track wrong for 17 years. I started feeding the cats to attract cats. And when I say cats, I'm talking about that wide receiver. I'm talking about those two guys on the basketball team that can dunk on fast breaks. I'm talking about high caliber, fast twitch athletes. I knew that cats love to compete. And I also knew that cats hated to run. When I say hate to run, I mean, if you're a 6'2" dunker on the basketball team, you don't want to come out and run 15 200s. So we stopped running. We started sprinting, jumping, and recovering to get faster. Now, this number is important to me. Since I started feeding the cats, well, the first 3 years when we started feeding the cats, we won the state in a 4x1. In the third year, we set the state record. In the 19th year, we broke the 3A state record. This is at 3 different high schools of 3 different sizes. This is really fast for a 4x1 average time, average best time for 21 consecutive years. This, now, if you're in Texas, you'll be saying that's bullshit. But this is Illinois fast, and I think it's probably Missouri fast as well. But the key fundamentals of feed the cats is to keep your kids happy and healthy at all times. I want kids to look forward to practice every damn day. Not only look forward to it, I want them to tell me that practice was the best time during their day. I believe the 400-meter dash is a sprint. If you don't believe it's a sprint, then you're probably not going to buy into my stuff. But this is why the why is so important. Clyde Hart's 8 types of endurance, or couldn't help but seeing endurance 4 times there. The 8 types of 400 workouts that I got when I attended a clinic that Clyde did. The first 4 were endurance. Let's just say that my aims are a lot simpler than this. And then you also look at the fact that most track teams have like 8 different training groups. And I don't know about you, but I've coached teams all by myself in the last 21 years, several times. And you just can't afford to have 8 different groups. We have 3 groups. We have those first 6 all together. And then we have the distance kids and throwers. Now, I say those first 6 groups, our 800 guys are with the distance. So we do not have a 400, 800 group ever. So this is the main thing. Stephen Covey said that the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And what is the main thing? It's max speed. It's how fast can you run. Slow people suck at the long jump, triple jump, high jump, pole vault, 100, 4x1, 110 highs, 200, 4x2, 300 intermediates, the 400, and the 4x4. My throws coach, I texted this slide out today, not texted, I tweeted it. My throws coach sent me a message today and said, I've never seen a great thrower who was slow. And somebody else sent me a text that said, I've never seen a great 800 guy that was slow. So maybe speed really is the key component to the majority of track events. Now, I want to give Clyde, this is outstanding stuff. I absolutely agree with this. He believed that it was much easier to teach endurance to sprinters than to try to develop speed in a middle distance runner. I 100% believe this, 100%. That's why the best 200 guys are your best 400 guys. It's not your best 800 necessarily that can come down and run the 4. You want those 22-second guys in the 200 to move up to the 4. But see, we handle this fact differently. He handled it by recruiting guys that ran 46 flat in high school and worked on endurance with them. I take kids that can barely break 60 in the 400 as freshmen, and I try to maximize their speed. How do you train a cat? You sprint as fast as possible. That means timed, no, first of all, spiked up, timed, recorded, ranked, and published. As often as possible. For elite sprinters, 3 times a week. For slow guys, you can go every day. And then staying as fresh as possible. You have to cherish speed. You never train speed when guys are tired. Nido o omo wa irumo ezu. If you chase 2 rabbits, you'll catch neither one. I believe if you have high school kids and you try to work on speed on one day and endurance on the next, you won't get fast and you're not going to be in great shape either. I believe that you can only catch one of these 2 rabbits, and you better catch speed. You better keep guys that look like this away from your sprinters. You know, guys that, you know, have the runner's watch and the stopwatch and the program and the cool hat and all that stuff. This guy, I know he's already run a 10 miler earlier in the day and he's already thinking about tomorrow's 10 miler. Well, distance ideas will kill cats. So keep these kind of guys away from your sprinters at all times. I get this all, you know, people see Marcellus and they go, well, we don't have anybody like Marcellus. We got a bunch of slow twitch athletes, so we just have to run them to death. Well, volume will never create speed. Your kids will remain slow. I also get this a lot where, oh, you know, Feed the Cats is an elite program, but how about the average kid? That just pisses me off to no end. My freshmen look no different than your freshmen. Tommy Harris played the trumpet in the band, and he was never on a team ever in his life when he came out as a freshman, and he ran a 1.21 in the 10-meter fly. And then we had Devon Rabowski, who had a Puerto Rican mother, a black father, and a Polish last name. And he had never been on a team in his life. Matter of fact, he was homeless after his freshman year. But if you look at how these two guys progressed during their time with me, that's incredible speed gains. So these guys were not elite, but they left my program elite. I think it's important that you look at why we do the things we do. Well, one of the things, because I'm in Illinois, I might do things differently than if I coached in California. I'll explain that in a minute. Spring sucks in Chicago. I don't know how it is in Missouri, but springs are cold and dark and windy and wet. Because I coach boys, the football track symbiosis is really, really important. 60% of my sprint group are football players. I must have a strong relationship with football. We do have an indoor facility, which really helps us in running short sprints. Now, if I didn't have an indoor facility, we'd have rollout runways in the hallways, and we would still be sprinting. But I'm saying that the fact that we have a stretch of about 80 meters all to ourselves is a damn good thing. It's also interesting that I know Ryan works on the girls' side. I have never coached a girl ever. We have segregated track in Illinois. I've coached boys for 39 years. I never coached a girl. Another thing that really helps is my distance kids are totally taken care of at Plainfield North. Andy Dirks, the guy I was making fun of in that picture, is such a great coach. This is a really cool thing that in the past 5 years, we've averaged 19 kids under 5 minutes in the mile for 5 years. Some years, I think our best was like 22 kids under 5 in the mile. That's a really healthy distance program. So it's really nice that I can really focus on the sprinters without worrying about those other 4 events. So let's look at what I meant about Illinois being different. If you look at the 4 sprints, the 4 short sprints in Illinois, they are spaced apart. So a guy that's really fast, he's not going to run the 400. Most likely, he's going to do the 4 short things. You can really rack up a lot of points by doing that. And then you look at the 400 and 4x4 in Illinois, and neither one are protected. By that, I mean, you got all your good 200-meter guys running the 4x2. They're not running the 4. And then you got your best 1 or 2 kids in the open 2, and they're not running the 4x4. Not every state is like that. Ryan State, I would say a good sprinter should be able to run all 4 still, but they do have 2 of them back to back. And look at how the 4x4 is protected in Missouri. They got that 2 mile between the 200 and the 4x4. So your fast kid could actually run the 200 and the 4x4. In Texas, I guarantee that Marcellus Moore would have run the 4x4 instead of one of those events. He would have run the 4x4 at every state meet because the 4x4 is A, protected by the mile, and B, double points. Double points in the 4x4 will really create an incredible 4x4 environment. So if I was in Texas, maybe I'd do things a little different. California is really bizarre because they don't have the 4x2 or 4x8. They only have 3 short sprints. So gee, if you have a guy like Michael Norman at Vista Murrieta under Coley Candell, he's going to run the short events and he's probably going to run one of the two 400s. Matter of fact, he ran them both in two of the short events. I believe he'd run the 4x1, the 400, the 200, and then the 4x4. So it's almost like California said, let's have a bunch of great quarter milers, whereas Illinois said, screw the 400. And please don't compare times between state and state, because it's so much different. The states of Texas, California, Georgia, and Florida have a huge dopamine advantage. Sun creates vitamin D, which creates dopamine, and dopamine allows sprinters to move their arms and legs faster, and also gives a reckless confidence to somebody. All of us need to get out in the sunshine, get light in our eyes and light on our torso, and that will really help us. But anybody that coaches in the Chicago area knows there ain't much dopamine around. Now, I talked about football, and so I have to, this is important in the why I do things. Football coaches love speed. They love speed like nobody's business. Everybody now wants to be like the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously the fastest team in the NFL. Second fastest team happened to be the team they beat in the Super Bowl. But they don't maintain speed very well because they don't understand it. And then because they don't understand it, it's kind of like they just say, okay, speed is genetic. We don't have to worry about it. But they do a terrible job in improving speed. So that's where I come in. I can come in and show a football coach, this is what I can do for your program. In 2007, we had 140 kids. This is my first year at Plainfield North, second year of the school. We still did not have seniors. We had 140 kids on our roster, and only 3 of them could go sub 460 in the 40. By 2017, we had 32 kids under 460 in the 40. See, a football coach that sees this, he's going to tell his fast twitch athletes, you need to get out there and let Coach Holler coach you. Well, by the way, in 2017, we played for the state championship in Class 7A and got beat 26-13 by East St. Louis, who was ranked 9 in the nation. So let's review this for a second. Feed the cats, overarching approach, and the why. I refuse to run a program that kids hate. I refuse it. When I had my own kids, I have 4 kids. I just did the math yesterday. If you add up their ages, 125 years of kids that I have under me. So anyway, my 4 kids had some miserable experiences in high school sports, miserable. And here's something that you need to always remember. If you ask a high school kid if he loves your program, he'll always say yes. Always. Even if you were the worst damn coach in the world and they hated every day of your damn sport, they are scared to death of you and will not say it to your face. In exit interviews of my 3 kids leaving the football program, when their coach said, tell me how you liked your experience, my kids looked them in the eye and said, I loved it, coach. It's kind of sickening, but that's the way it is. I believe the 400 is a sprint and the 10-meter fly is the KPI. The key performance indicator in the 400 meters is how fast you can run. If you don't believe that, then you'll have a hard time following the rest of my presentation. But I truly believe that speed is it for the 100, 200, matter of fact, all those events I just showed you. I believe that boys track teams that don't attract football players will consist of band kids, distance runners, and nerds. And there's a lot of teams like this out there because a lot of track teams have no football players on staff. The head track coach is also the cross-country coach. The track program complains about the football coach hoarding athletes. The football program does not trust the track program because they've seen what happens to them. They send them their great wide receiver and they run the great wide receiver 15 200s on the first day. That kind of crap, will end. You just won't have a good track team, in my opinion. Remember what I said about in Illinois, the fastest athlete can easily run for the shortest sprints. Matter of fact, in 2018, we won the 100, 200, 4x1, and 4x2 at the state meet. We scored 40 points in those 4 events. And it's very doable. Matter of fact, it's doable 2 days in a row. In Illinois, we do prelims on Friday, and then we do finals on Saturday. And we won all 4 events on both days. So this is very doable. So you have to remember that you may say, well, Coach Holler, I don't think you've had the greatest 4x4 teams in the state of Illinois. I'll say, well, that's maybe because a guy like Marcellus will never run the 4x4 because we need him to score points, where it's all about being a great team. And then the last thing is that cats just don't like to run. So you got to stop running them into the ground and start doing strategic things that will allow them to sprint farther and still like it. And that's really going to be the focus of the rest of my talk. That's it.
Awesome. 21 minutes, Tony. Just FYI.
I did good. I like that. I was worried. I thought it'd be 30 to 35.
Cool. Ryan, unmute yourself. Any thoughts before you jump into yours, or you just want to roll right into it?
Well, first thing, we do coach different genders, so there is a lot to be said for that and the attitudes and speeds and times. When I get into it, I do have to think I have to disagree. I do believe you can chase more than one thing at a time. It just depends on when you want to chase it and how you want to chase it, and can you get multiple things done in one particular aspect. So I think we're going to discuss that and explain that as I move forward. But I think you can get a few things done at the same time. I mean, if you look at it, and Tony is a science teacher, so, he'll have a lot to say about this, but, when we look at energy systems and we look at energy system development, it's not like one energy system's turning on and another one's turning off. It's just what's dominant for that particular period of time. And what are we trying to do to create energy and locomotion? And what are we trying to do to maximize our athletes? The other thing I would say is I take nerds all the time and turn them into studs. You give me a hardworking kid and I'll figure out what they're good at and we'll make them good at something. They might not be a sprinter. They might be a high jumper. They might be a pole vaulter. They might be, an intellectual thrower, which I know that might surprise you. I've had a few, one just graduated with a doctorate in chemistry. The guy threw 180 feet. He was a nerd. He was a hell of an athlete. So you need your cats. But
I will jump in there though. I didn't want, just to clarify, those two guys in the graph that I showed. One kid played the trumpet in the band, and the other, neither one had ever been on a team in his life. Never been on a team in his life. So track absolutely attracts all types. It really does. But the type that I believe will really make you a great team is that guy that can dunk. if your team is a team without those fast twitch athletes, those cats, I think you're going to have a hard time playing at the highest level. So I didn't want people to think that I cut the nerds. I only cut the slow kids. Ooh.
There have been plenty of times, I think, though, that when we discuss this too, it's like, obviously your top flight kids, you were blessed to have one last year. I was blessed to have one last year, and they did some really great stuff. But in the years when we're lean, especially depending on the size of your school, my idea is to build a stable of thoroughbreds, not necessarily cats. And there are many years where I won't have a 100-meter finalist, but I'll have a 4x1 that's all state, and wouldn't matter what class we were in, we would be all state. There was, one year we took second and I didn't have an individual all state kid. We just blended as a group, and there was a lot getting done that allowed them to be successful across the board. And I would also probably tell you that when you're looking at team titles and things like that, those kids that might be that third tier kid or fourth tier kid is the one that oftentimes is winning you those invitationals, maybe not the state championship, but I've won many a district championship, which is our regional, like you guys have in Illinois, a sectional, with those type of kids. So we always got to keep things in perspective, but that's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, one more clarification though, because I get this shit all the time, where people are like, "Hey, those freshmen are important too." Are you kidding me? We had 30 of them on our team this year. I mean, we record, rank, and publish every freaking sprint, every lactate workout, all that stuff. We celebrate our freshmen and sophomores as good as any program in the state of Illinois that I've ever seen. So it's important. I think that I talk so much about cats, about the fast twitch athletes, that people get the mistaken view that somehow I'm an elitist, and I'm not. So anyway, so there.
Hey, real quick, Tony, I know there's been a lot of talk about spiking up in terms of truly, getting max speed work. if you don't have the ability to spike up, you don't have a rollout runway,
Yep.
are you just someone that says the next best thing is the next best thing, or is
Yes.
there some clarification?
100%. You do what you can do. I do think that the best coaches, I mean, Coach Steiner at Fitch High School in Ohio, he has 2 rollout runways, and he spiked up and running fast on those 2 runways in the hallway. So yes, your next best thing is run diagonal across the gym in your gym shoes. The thing that I tell people is, if you can't do that, you just do a hell of a lot of jumping, jump, plyos, but never default to the easiest thing. And that is go out and run 3 miles. You know, never default to something that's going to make you slower as a sprinter.
Cool. All right, Ryan, let's jump into yours.
All right. So what I think is interesting is, and one of the reasons why I titled this article or titled this program The Critical Mass, is this idea of, well, a nuclear reaction. In a nuclear reaction, you have materials that might be somewhat dangerous on their own, but when they're put together at a very particular time, they can split atoms and destroy the world. Well, as a track and field coach, that's what I want to do to everybody I compete against. I want to leave them decimated. And in order to do that, I've got to be able to attack all the events I can in the sport of track and field. I use the 400 meters as my starting point because I feel like it provides the athletes the most critical materials for them to blow up on other people in a good way. Now, when we look at this system, a lot of people think when you talk 400-meter dash, sorry guys, and all that type of stuff. Can you guys still see my screen? Are we good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when we talk about this program, people oftentimes think that, oh, it's got to be all 400s all the time. You got to run 10 times 400. You've got to do a crazy number of 200s. We're going to get into this and talk about how particularly that ain't the case. Just because I look at Clyde Hart as being a good model for some of the aspects of the critical mass system, there are things that I don't agree with. We don't have our 400-meter runners doing cross-country runs in the off-season unless they're a cross-country runner and they're running down to that event, which our school record holder was also 8th in the state of Missouri in the 5K, and also was the fastest girl in the 800 meters, and also happened to be the second fastest girl in the state in the 400. So talent is talent. And my job is, as a coach, is I want to be able to build an athlete that has range, that can go one way or another. Now, as we'll talk about later, I allow my athletes to reveal themselves as we move through what their best events are. Now, there's a strategy to that, which we'll talk about when we get to the end of my discussion after kind of my overall arching philosophy. But when we look at that, I want to be able to build these kids to do a lot. I want them to be able to run 2 days in a row. I want them to be able to move down to the 100, up to the 400, or beyond if that's where their talent is taking them. But we have to figure that out. Testing becomes really, really important. Time trials become really important. And like Tony, I will tell you that the fastest kids in my program have had the fastest flying 30s. That's a great test, but that doesn't tell you everything, but it does tell you a lot, and it has a high correlation to potential later on. In fact, my fastest distance runners, just as he said, also have a really, really fast 30, but you might not know that they're going to be your fastest distance kid if they're not prepared and trained to move up. And you might not have your fastest sprint kid be prepared to move down if you haven't done the necessary critical work, because you just don't know. And there's so many things that we have to check the boxes off in training to do. So what do I think that Clyde Hart did well? Clyde Hart got within what I call the critical amount of distance and the critical amount of intensity that you need to have in order to run a really fast 400. None of my kids are ever going to run a 350 or a 450 slow. Now, is that going to improve absolute speed? Hell no. But am I going to have a day where we're going to go after absolute speed and acceleration? You damn well better believe it. And that's going to be what that day is for. And we're not going to mix stimulus on the day, but we might mix the stimulus from day to day as we move forward. Additionally, I'll have different focuses depending on my week. I'll have a speed week, a power week, a quote unquote endurance week, but I would call it a work capacity week. And then we have a recovery week where we want our athletes to run really, really fast before we change times, looking at either PR pace, date pace, or current pace. And we'll talk about that too as we get into it. So what did Clyde Hart not do well? Well, we already talked about it. I'm not going to send my sprinters ever on a cross-country run. That's never going to happen. Okay. Number two, I'm not going to run less than absolutely all out longer intervals the first day of the week. So if I'm going to run my special endurance, those kids are giving me a 95% effort. That doesn't mean absolute speed. Those are two different things. We're going to have a lot of recovery in between, and we're going to have a lot of recovery between all of the intervals. That's what that Monday might look like. What did Clyde do? Clyde would run slow 200s that progressively would get faster as the season moved along. Fundamentally, that's something I don't agree with. When I run the 200s, we're going to start off with what I consider a small dosage, which we'll talk about it. I don't think tempo is a bad word. I know Tony and Chris Corfus, who's on this conversation, absolutely hate it, and we can have a heated discussion about that as we move forward. But I believe in it for purposes of back-end 200 pace. And what ends up happening is as you tend to run some of these things, and as the intervals tend to either gain amounts or lessen amounts depending on the time of your season, it changes the fundamental principles of what you're trying to get done. And it might not look like tempo that people typically think of when they think of those efforts. And we'll get into that with an example of a workout that somebody just did recently where they did 6 times 200 all at 22. It's a very type of workout. Yeah, Tony.
You said something about that tempo works on back end 200 pace. What does that
So
mean?
the back end of a 400 meters that we will develop reps where we're running repeatedly over and over again at the speed in which they're supposed to be coming back at. That's one. So when you're looking at a tempo workout, the devil's in the details. Are we talking about building lactate? Are we talking about buffering lactate? I believe in buffering lactate's an important concept in a certain amount of dosage. But then as the season moves along, that workout becomes more of what are they supposed to be doing at the back end of a 400 and getting used to that rhythm. And then as we move past that, it actually becomes a speed endurance workout towards the end of the season as we reduce reps and becomes more of what you would traditionally see of a race model of a 150, except now we're capable of maintaining that for the 200, which becomes really, really valuable and being able to compete 2 days in a row, not just one day.
But
anyway,
just two clarifications there. One is just to define tempo. How fast are you running? And then the second question is my definition of tempo never approaches lactate. Am I wrong on that?
For you, maybe so. So if you're talking about it, so if you're talking about extensive versus intensive, right? So if you're going at 70% and you're doing hundreds on the minute, that's a very different tempo workout than running 85% with 2.5 minutes recovery. The purpose of those workouts are completely different. You know, if you're doing a 70%, you're doing a high-low program, kind of like Charlie Francis, where you're going really fast, and the next day that tempo becomes active recovery, and it's not exhaustive. If you're doing 85%, it's going to be tiring, and you're going to build waste through the back end of the workout. Again, the purpose of that workout is to get the body to adapt to that buffering capacity. As you move through the season, it's no longer going to be buffering capacity. It's going to be focused on back-end pace. And then as you move further through the season, it doubles as a speed endurance day that might be able to follow up a special endurance day, which a lot of people go, holy cow, that's a lot of work. True. But if we're going in the state championship season and we're running a 400, 4x2, 4x4, 300 hurdles, 4x8, whatever the mix of events you're going to do, the body and the athlete has to be able to tolerate specific critical volumes of distance and intensity that match up with what they might compete in. Now, when we get into the championship phase, those workouts become smaller and smaller, less number of reps, and we create more opening of space. And the competitions themselves at the end of the season mimic some of those special endurance and speed endurance workouts. So,
okay, but in your tempo runs, you are actually creating lactate sometimes?
Absolutely, 100% with short recovery, incomplete recovery.
And you can do that at 70% pace?
No, that would be a different type of workout. So that workout would
You're
be
talking
a
like 85.
restorative workout.
Okay.
That would be something for your short sprinters that are a high-low program. And that's kind of the idea is when we look at this, the whole idea of the critical mass system is you're targeting the event that you're running. So the critical mass for the 100 is going to look different than the 400. The critical mass for a quad-centric sprinter who demands a lot of recovery is going to look a lot more like your system, where if I have an athlete that's more of a quick twitch oxidative athlete, they're going to look a little bit more like my system. And we'll talk about that. We have science and stuff to look at and percentages with genetic research to kind of guide us, which we'll get into.
You're good.
As we move forward. So moving on with the gentleman in the middle, the guy on the left, that is Mike Hurst. Mike Hurst is the godfather of the concurrent system, which is more of my belief structure in how to train all things sprinting, but definitely the 400. And what that is we want to train all things at all times, give them their due with, anywhere from a 7 to 10 to 14 day microcycle, depending on what athlete you're training, and then what are the necessary critical components, the KPIs of that particular event. Now with Mike, one of the things I've stolen from him is that he will reset many times throughout the season and go back to some of what he calls his general preparation phase, which doesn't look like what we think about, which is a lot of slow nonsense. It's still really, really fast, but he goes back to some of the general principles with some 200s and some 150s and some 350s and doing grass runs, long hill runs. That'll be part of his his GPP, and then he'll cycle back to that. I stole the idea of having multiple peaks in a year. So if I'm training a kid from November all the way to May, we're going to have 2 peaks. If they're training from November all the way to the end of July in summer track, we're going to have 3 peaks. And we're going to recycle some of those principles we did at the beginning of the year, not all of them, but many of those things. Dan Path, who's also there, is an influence in my system, which is this whole mentality of it all depends. So the critical mass is adapted to whatever event and whatever athlete you have, and the athlete reveals themselves, and then you go with that in terms of their training. So for example, talking about nerds, going back to that, I had a young lady named Ellie Liebman, 35 on her ACT, 4.2 GPA on a 4.0 scale, and is one of the smartest kids. She looks like she's better suited to be in a chess competition than as a track and field athlete. But through testing, both with the flying 30, with a 400-meter time trial, with long jump and triple jumping, we found out that this kid can do a whole bunch. And she ended up being in our program the #1 scorer in our varsity points. Our school record holder in the long jump could go 18.6, 37.4 in the triple jump, and also was all-state in the 400-meter dash. If I only trained her to feed the cats, she'd have been very good at the long and triple, but I don't know that she would have been as good in the 400-meter dash. Now, why do I know that? How do I know that? Because I early on trained a certain way, and then 5 years into my program, I got to meet this guy to the far right, Coach Burris, who is the coach of the national record holder in the 400-meter dash, state record holder, AAU national record holder in the 800, 4x4 national record holder team, AAU championship or USATF club champion coach. And what he made me realize is that we don't have to be scared of long intervals and quote unquote hard work. We just have to frame it in a way and produce it in a way and stair step it in a way that kids can handle it without them running away with their hair on fire. So what kind of athlete are you? Bruce Lee's got 2 types of athletes, in my opinion, based on these quotes. Don't get set into one form, adapt it, build it into your own, let it grow, be like water, empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. Now put water in a cup, it becomes a cup. You put water into the bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes a teapot. Now water can flow, it can crash, be like water. So that's one idea, which sounds to me very adaptive. Adapt to your situation, and as a coach, you adapt to your athletes. In the other situation, you've got Bruce Lee that says, I fear not a man who's practiced 10,000 kicks once, okay? Or excuse me, yeah, I fear not the man who practiced 10,000 kicks once, but the man I fear is who kicked, one kick 10,000 times. So that's more of what I believe is Tony's philosophy, which is speed, 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 speed. I tend to be more of the Bruce Lee on the left. Now, I believe that you can shape, you can form, you can change. And in the time that we have, it's our job and our duty to prepare our athletes to be able to do the things that they can do best athletically and allow them to produce it, but do it in a way that honors their talent. So, tail of the tape. So a couple things I think is important for us to discuss. I'm at a much smaller school than Tony. In Missouri, you're allowed to coach boys and girls because our state championships are on the same day. Tony's at a much, quote unquote, newer school, I guess. I mean, it's been many years now. My school's been around for a long time. We have no indoor track season, so I have to do winter conditioning. There are some track meets, but most of our athletes don't go to them. And in addition, it's illegal for us to coach them, even though some of the coaches in our area do. Tony, am I right to say you're not a big fan of summer track?
No, we have a 19-week season, and the kids can do AAU if they want, but I don't. I would rather them play football.
Right. And so for us, we don't have that official season, and a lot of athletes will play basketball. They'll wrestle. They'll swim. So they're doing a lot of different things. So for us, summer track's really important. I've spent a number of years coaching summer track. The issue, though, with summer track is it's very developed in the St. Louis area, but there is a lot of interference. So you have to be careful what you wish for because there's a lot of uncles and cousins and sisters and brothers in people's ears all the time. Now, lactic education. Tony and I have talked about this before. A lot of Tony's quote-unquote lactate work comes from competition as a byproduct of competition. He'll have a number of weeks where his athletes will run 2 meets a week, not necessarily as elite, and I'll let him explain that. Most of my athletes only run 1 meet a week. And so I feel like there needs to be a session that provides lactate education because that might not be getting there with the athlete. And I want them to be able to resist it. And fundamentally, I don't race my athletes into shape. I don't believe in it. Our boys coach definitely believes in that. And we've had 2 very different results in terms of outcomes at the state championship. State qualifying for Illinois, you state qualify once. In Missouri, you've got to state qualify 3 times, which means we've got districts, you got to be top 4, sectionals, you got to be top 4. And then just like for Illinois, we have to make it out of the prelims into the finals. Now, one of the big differences Tony already highlighted and stole my mojo is that we're making choices about what athletes we put in what events based on the possibility of what they can physically accomplish. If you're trying to run your 200-meter athlete in the 4x4 in a sectional meet, that's going to be a tough go for that athlete. That athlete's going to be exhausted, and even if you put them at anchor, that's not an easy thing to do. Where we have a 3,200-meter in between, which means we have the men's and the women's 3,200-meter in between, that provides a lot more space, and thus the 4x4, the 400, and the 200 become a much easier potential schedule for my athletes to run, and therefore I'm going to train to those things. Now, if I had a 9-month season like Tony has, or 9 months, sorry, how many weeks is it?
19 weeks.
Yeah, 19 weeks. So if I had that, there's probably some things I might do differently because I wouldn't be able to, I could take a more patient approach. But because I don't have that additional indoor season and I don't get all of those athletes for winter conditioning, and we get a good number. I mean, we were averaging 30 to 40 between our boys and girls program this winter. But I've got to get certain things done. I've got to rip off the Band-Aid and get to certain distances that you may never get to if you start out with the super minimal dose. You just might not get to it. And for me, I got to get to that because they're not going to have the lactate education. They're not going to have the competition education to provide them some of those adaptations that you could get in a meet that I don't have the benefit of getting. All right. Next thing. What is the system not? It's not only for the 400 meters. I've had 3 different girls in the time that I've coached be runner-up in the 100-meter dash. 2 have broken 12. Another one would have broken 12 if it wasn't for the freaking coronavirus this year. And I probably would have had her teammate also break 12 this year because we had another fast kid that was a freshman, and we probably had the best team in the state of Missouri overall. So it was really sad. But this isn't just for the 400. I believe you can adapt the critical mass system to every single event in track and field. You just have to figure out what are your key performance indicators, what are the things you're trying to target, and then you've got to make sure that those things are targeted throughout the year. This does not neglect speed. One of the things that frustrates Clyde Hart the most, and I had an opportunity to talk to Clyde Hart a couple years ago, and he said the thing that frustrates him is that people think that he never goes fast. The thing he said he took out of the program because of Michael Johnson was speed endurance, that he removed that because he couldn't keep his athletes healthy doing the really, really long stuff, the speed endurance stuff, and then doing speed. But he said,
Ryan,
yes, yeah.
Did he never one time ever timed a guy in a short sprint in practice, though?
Right.
Never.
So again, one of the devils in the details things is when we're looking at all out speed, and you're right, he didn't strap him up to a free lap, which by the way, everybody should be doing in practice when they're timing the short sprints. If you don't have a free lap system, you're not accurately timing those short sprints. There's going to be errors and you're not necessarily going to get the accurate results you want. Okay. But one of the things that he did do is in their warm-up, at the end of the warm-up, it crescendos to all-out short sprints of 50s, 30s, and 60s. But when you look at it, you find that warm-up's kind of burying some of those all-out open sprints, and people don't realize that that's where that speed work is happening, the traditional all-out speed work. Now, is it followed up by other volumes and other intensities? Absolutely. But because it's happening at the beginning of practice, there's still that speed getting done. All of my athletes in my program, they have multiple accelerations and all-out sprints pretty much every day at the crescendo at the end of our warm-up. It's an A run, a strider, a build-up, an accelerator, and we vary those as we move throughout the season. And we do that in cross-country as well. Highly aerobic training. I'm not doing anything slow. Nothing slow unless it's for restorative measures, active recovery. And if we have to do some seriously slow stuff, I will cross-train. I will send my athlete onto an elliptical or a bike to get some of that work done versus doing that stuff off of the ground versus gravity. Dependent upon long intervals. I'm not spending a lot of time running 600s and 500s. Usually 450 is as high as we go, unless that athlete is what I call a critical zone athlete, which is more of an 800, 400 meter hybrid. And then they'll train some days with the sprinters, and then they'll train some days with the distance runners, and we rotate days. So Monday, week 1, they'll be with the sprinters doing a speed endurance or special endurance workout. Monday, week 2, they'll do a critical mass workout with the distance kids doing a special endurance or speed endurance workout that's distance related. And then we would flip as we move throughout the week, giving them 5 sessions of both distance and 5 sessions of sprints. But that's for an 800 kid. So you're not going to see that for a sprinter in my program, unless I believe they could be an exceptional 800 runner, which you all know and we've already established. You got to be fast as hell to run the 800 as well. You're not going to see my athletes run repeats of 200s into the 14s and the 16s and all that kind of stuff. We never get there. One of the reasons why we never get there is I usually start off with 6. We go up 2 weeks, 3 weeks in a row. We come down a week, we go back up, and then eventually get to the middle of the season and we start unloading again. I've only got 13 weeks in the season. There's just not enough time. In addition to that, every athlete in my program is at a different training value. If you're a rookie, you're at one level. If you're an untrained veteran, you're at another level. And if you're an elite athlete, you're at another level when it comes to volume. All right, hot takes. If you're an absolutist about anything, you're absolutely wrong. Okay, I believe in the all depends philosophy, which Dan Paff talks about all the time. A lot of things depend. We already established, I don't think tempo is a bad word. There are very, very few truths in this world, and especially when it comes to athletics and humans. We all have a different genetic makeup.
I reject that. I think gravity is a truth. I think gravity is an absolute. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's
why there's
just interjecting that anybody that says there are not absolutes in the world is absolutely wrong. But go ahead.
So that's what I said. There are few truths. I don't believe static stretching is evil. A lot of people do. I don't. If you follow up static stretching with, some plyometric activities, speed runs, biomechanical runs, running drills. It resets the neurological system, and we don't have a lot of hamstring injuries in our program. The only athlete I've ever had that's had a hamstring injury has small feet, a real bad Q angle, and is overweight. I believe that the ability of the athlete should drive planning. I also believe you need to develop an athlete that can thrive in a back-to-back situation, whether that's in a single day where they have to come back and run multiple prelims, or if they have to come back day to day. Last year at the state championship, they made our athletes run 3 sprints in less than an hour. That requires a unique set of skills and a unique set of preparations to survive that. Luckily enough, we were able to survive and thrive. I believe you need to slow cook the meat. I know Tony believes in very, very short practices. I just can't get that done. I don't believe in it. I believe that there needs to be a lot of things getting done to develop and build an overall athlete, to make them robust and to make them injury resilient in my program. So sometimes it takes our athletes 45 minutes to get through all the modalities, the team huddle, and then we get into our energy system development of our practice. I don't believe you need to nerf work to keep kids happy. There's plenty of ways to make them aggressive and enjoy the challenge of working so that you can get the necessary things accomplished. Does that require some creative actions? Yes. Does it require a very resilient mindset? Absolutely. I also believe that longer intervals don't kill speed when used judiciously. All right, last thing, okay? This is my daughter, about to hop in the blocks here. Not bad for a 6-year-old. Now, here is Justin Robinson. You can tell in the position, they're in 4th place right now. So if you guys want to get your stopwatch out at the handoff. Okay, here we go. Now, why am I showing you this? Because there's a lot of things we need to do for our athletes throughout their career. We need to make it fun, but you don't also have to be afraid of hard work. Naturally, your athletes are going to be fast, but the fastest sprinters in the world, once they achieve elite status, it typically takes about 8.75 years for them to run a PR after they've achieved elite status. So everybody says Usain Bolt was world-class when he was 14 years old. Yes, he was. But go look at when he was 14 and then when he set the world record in the 200-meter dash, and guess what you're going to find? So what's the point? The point is we need to be preparing our athletes to do a lot of things. We need to be able to build them globally, and rising tide raises all ships. I want my athletes to be able to come out of those blocks, whether they're 6 years old, whether they're 18, whether they're 34, but I also want eventually for them to be able to run in a big boy race after multiple rounds and run basically what's a world record split in about 44 seconds. All right, that's it for my opening salvo.
Yeah, about the only things I agreed with is when you were criticizing Clyde Hart. Jeez. I feel like I need to redo my next presentation because people are going to think that I'm so damn simple-minded that that I need to go read the Sprinter's Compendium, like cover to cover, so that I can work on my percentages and 38 different types of workouts and shit. And man, that's, whew, man, I've got to come watch you work because it looks complicated to me.